Welcome everybody tonight to our final event for 2023 UN World Interfaith Harmony Week. My name is Eileen Bell. I'm on the board of directors for the Edmonton Interfaith Center for Education and Action, and I've been one of the organizers for this week's activities. And so excited to wrap up the week with hearing the presentation that we are going to tonight from Lewis Cardinal. He is also a board member with the Interfaith Center, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him in just a moment. But first, I want to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory. It is the ancestral traditional home of many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, as well as Métis and Inuit. And as we go into the presentation, to ask everybody but Lewis, please to mute your microphones, and we'll have some question time at the end of the presentation. Lewis Cardinal is a communicator and an educator who has dedicated his life's work to creating and maintaining connections and relationships that cross cultural divides. His work has mirrored his personal vision of a socially just and responsive society, and his long track record of public service includes, he's a founding board member of the Fort Edmonton Management Company, a board member of Theatre Network, board member of the North Saskatchewan River Valley Conservation Society, and board emeritus of the Council for a Parliament of World Religions. And that's just to mention a few. Lewis has received Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee Medal for public service, the Inspire Award for public service, which is the highest award given to an Indigenous person by Indigenous people in Canada. He's received the Province of Alberta's Centennial Medal for his work in human rights and diversity, the Distinguished Alumni Award from Grant MacEwan University, and was conferred the honorary degree of Doctor of Sacred Letters from St. Stephen's College at the University of Alberta. Lewis is Woodland Cree from the Sucker Creek Cree First Nation up in northern Alberta. His consulting company, Cardinal Strategic Communications, specializes in Indigenous education, governance, and communications. And currently, Lewis is project manager for Kichiaski Sacred Earth in the city of Edmonton, Canada's first urban Indigenous ceremony and cultural designated land base. And we are so privileged and welcome to have him here tonight to talk to us about what it means to be an ally to Indigenous peoples and how to do so in a meaningful way, not just a paying lip service way. So I'm going to, again, ask everyone to mute themselves, except Lewis, and I'll mute myself and turn the time over to Lewis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eileen. That was a great eulogy. I mean, introduction. I hope I can live up to it. I'm really honored, of course, to be sharing some thoughts with all of us on how to be an ally. And I know some of you are already on your way to it, but I'm assuming that we're going to be all on the same page in just a little while. But I want to acknowledge the terrific work that Eileen has done in pulling this all together and making this whole week a wonderful week filled with all kinds of opportunities to learn and to share, which I think is really important to all of us. So thank you for doing that, and to the Edmonton Interfaith Network. I really appreciate your work and your continued support and everything that we do. There's just one little note of change that is with the project. We called it Kichiaski, but we changed the name just slightly and are starting to use it now at the beginning of the year. And what we're calling it is Kichikau-Aski. And I'll talk about that at the end of, towards the end of my presentation as allyship in action. But Kichikau-Aski, it means this land here is sacred. So it gives a specific designation, whereas Kichiaski is a general reference meaning sacred land. So that's why we changed it to be a lot more specific. So Kichikau-Aski, kind of like Kachikau-Aski, but Kichikau-Aski is the name that we're going to start using instead of Kichiaski. So anyway, with that note, I'll get started here. And I know that, time is always of the essence. So let me share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, and what I'll be doing is talking about, first, I always think it's important to touch touch the understanding of the foundations of Indigenous worldviews. That's always important. And that's one of the things that I think make allyship more effective, is that when you really understand some of the foundational cosmology, epistemology, just ways of knowing and ways of being of other people, it helps you to be a better ally. Then you understand more about motivations in terms of what Indigenous people are doing or want to do. And then that leads naturally into treaty. And why is that important? Because it is connected to Indigenous worldviews. And of course, and that leads us into how to be good relatives, as my grandfather would say, because we are all related, and the treaties make us so. And then finally, I'll do a quick presentation on the Kichi Aski and give you an update as to where that is right now and some of the journey that we took and to make that possible. So I'm going to go into my presentation here. Perfect. Okay. So it's called How to Be an Ally. It's all about relationships. And that phrase, it's all about relationships, is something that I learned in my years of working with Indigenous elders. I had asked them a question. It was an ongoing question that I would ask elders from time to time, not only here in Edmonton, but also around the world, is what is the most critical thing do you think that is facing Indigenous people, or just humanity in general, around the world? And it was interesting to see the response was, it seems that we've forgotten how to have relationships. And we as human beings, not just Indigenous people, not just non-Indigenous people, but all human beings have that naturally ingrained in our cultural traditions, going back to the beginning of time, is that everything is in relationship to something else. And sometimes we kind of throw ourselves out of balance by not recognizing that we really have to work at relationships, not only amongst each other, but also amongst other things, living things, our planet that we're on, the spirit world, the cosmos. All these things are in relationship with us. And for me, when I think about that, it really humbles me more, because it really makes me realize that I'm just a little tiny speck, but this little tiny speck has a part to play in the bigger picture. So I do belong, and I am here for a reason. And that's why I do the things that I do. So it's all about relationships is the subtitle for this. Let me see if I can move. Oh, well, that's odd. Okay, here we go. So as we all know, indigenous comes from the Latin term indigenous, which means it comes from the Latin term indigena, which means born of the land or springs from the land. And it's a very important understanding, because indigenous then has both a spiritual and philosophical meaning to it, a connotation and a denotation, if you will. So the denotation, of course, is born of the land, or springs from the land, or comes from the land. But within that, the connotation is about relationship. It's a concept of being in relationship to each other. Now, we all know that there's been various names that have been applied to Indigenous people since like a very long time. Everything from Native to Indian to First Nations to Aboriginal, et cetera, et cetera. But Indigenous is a word for the first time that Indigenous peoples have given themselves. So this is something that we've identified for ourselves as to what we want to be called. And this was a global effort from Indigenous leaders from around the world. So born of the land, while it means that, it also has that relational concept. So it really is all about relationships and being connected and interconnected, and observations and knowledge of the natural and spiritual world, and recognizing that we as human beings are a part of something larger than ourselves. And we recognize that, and it really does keep us in our place, so to speak, that we are a part of something. We are not it, we are only a part of it. And that within this worldview, that we recognize there's more reality then meets the eye. We recognize the spirit world. We recognize that there is spirit in each of us. We're all sacred in that ancient tradition. We all come from that great mystery that we call God, or whatever name we apply to it. But we do come from that in that spirit form. So we are, as they say, a spiritual being having a human experience, rather than a human experience with a spirit. So I just think it kind of changes things around a little bit more and plugs us into a broader understanding of the world around us. Because everything in creation is sacred. Because we're created from Mother Earth. Everything that we're surrounded with around here, even our bodies, come from Mother Earth. So Mother Earth is very sacred, and therefore we are also sacred beings. And that life force is in all things. So then it leads us to understanding respect and reciprocity, because ceremonies are supported on that. It's important to have ceremonies, no matter how small or how large or how grand. The ceremonies really help us as human beings, and we all have ceremonies in our lives. And sometimes with people who don't believe that they do, you can find out, like going to Tim's in the morning can be a ceremony for some people. They can't start their day without it. Other people need to pray in the morning or do some sort of ceremony to get their spirit recharged and ready for the day. And we recognize too that everything has the right to be here because of that sacredness. Everything that is created has its purpose, has its function, and is interconnected with us all together, because we are related to all other beings and life forms. And we have to recognize as human beings, as we would say, to walk in a sacred manner, we have to recognize that what we do, what us human beings do, affects other people or other things or other life forms. So we have to walk with that mind of respect, because we recognize that there's a great circle of life, and that through that great circle of life, or that great council of life, we as human beings only hold but one seat or one place within that great circle of life. And that because of that, we know that we are connected to everyone who is in that circle. And that's why we use circles, to recognize that everyone and everything is equal as creation. But we human beings, we're not the center of the circle. We're only a part of the circle. And so because of that, we recognize that our relationships, they must be maintained. It becomes priority. Because as human beings, we tend to walk out of balance quite easily if we're not paying attention to the spirit or the spiritual. We tend to walk out of balance, become destructive, take way too much than we need. But the great thing about ceremony and ceremonies is that it is a way in which we bring ourselves back into balance, so we can stop that negative behavior. So it becomes an important part of life from the Indigenous perspective, because it is a relationship-centered approach to life and living. And it respects all things that are around us, all beings, all entities. And that each people, each nation of people are unique, because we understand that each person is considered an answer to a prayer that the Creator had heard at one time and sent each and every one of us down. And sent us down with our gifts and our unique talents to be who we are. But that was in response to that request from the Creator. So each person then becomes important. Each person is valued. And so as elder women have shared with me, when babies are born, they come down to have these little tiny fists that are closed like this. And it's because they're holding the gifts that we have. Each of us, the unique gifts that we bring with us from the Creator to bring into this world. Then it's our responsibility as an adult, as a parent, as a family member, as a community member, to help nurture that young child so that they can open their hands and reveal those gifts that are there. And we know then that those gifts will be able to help us and really fulfill that long time ago request of the Creator for help. So each one of you are sacred. Each one of you is no duplicate from each other. Each one of you have unique talents and gifts and insights that are valuable. And if we learn how to listen and we learn how to share, we can gain a lot of knowledge together and move together as a family or a good relationship. So relationships within that Indigenous context is preferred. And again, going back to that golden rule, one of many, of course, but it's all about relationships. So then as we move into treaties, treaties are ceremonies in their own rights. They're ancient ceremonies. Long before Canada was contacted with the Europeans, Indigenous people had made treaties amongst each other. And what's interesting about that is treaties were made prior to conflicts leading into war. And believe me, and I'm not trying to promote Indigenous people as being without aggression and war and conflict. We are, because we're human beings. All human beings do this. We all have the tendency to create conflict and tendency to be aggressive. But again, it's those ceremonies that bring us back together. So treaties then become a relationship between one nation and another. It is treaties that are adoption ceremonies in our worldview. It's where one nation adopts another nation, and then we become like brothers and sisters. So all treaties in Canada are based on the peace and friendship treaties that were created back in the 1600s, for example. The first treaty, the Truro Wampum, was between the Haudenosaunee which are the Mohawk, and the Dutch. And so that Truro Wampum gave us some lessons about living in peace and harmony with each other, like brothers and sisters. So the Truro Wampum is a belt about 4 feet long, with 2 purple stripes down the middle of it, with a white backdrop, 3 white lines of the white wampum. And that represents 2 vessels moving down the great river of life, the canoe and the settler's ship. And it was said that we would share the river of life by going side by side, not one ship outpacing the other. And neither would we try to get into each other's ship to steer it the way that we wanted to go, but we would go side by side, sharing the bounty of life and live like brothers and sisters. And for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows and the rivers flow. That phrase then has become a consistent phrase in all the treaty making processes across Canada since the Truro Wampum in 1613. And also to live like brothers and sisters. So you become family because we've adopted you. So it becomes a covenant, a nation-to-nation covenant. Oftentimes people will look at treaties and say, well, it's a business agreement or it's a contract, but no, it's not. It's something that goes beyond a contract. It's a covenant, and it's a sacred covenant between family members. It's like a marriage almost, that the deep commitment that you have to each other. Yes, you have financial obligations and there are politics and that sort of stuff, but also we have a deeper emotional relationship with each other. So it becomes much deeper, and it's also very spiritual in its nature. So the Royal Proclamation comes along in 1763, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the treaties are meant to maintain balance and good relations, because it becomes the foundation of what Canada is from coast to coast to coast. All treaties, even if they're called like Nunavut. Nunavut is a treaty that was made between the Inuit people and Canada as a nation. It may have not been called a treaty, but the essence of it and the foundation of it was very much based on treaties. So the Royal Proclamation in 1763 was ratified. A lot of people don't know this. At a 1764 Council of Niagara that was called by the British North American Governor Johnson, after they had pushed the French out of control of what was, I think, Lower Canada at the time, but they then created a Royal Proclamation, and so Governor Johnson did a wise move, and he sent out copies of the Royal Proclamation to the Indigenous leaders in Canada at the time, largely around the Great Lakes and northern parts of Ontario and parts of Manitoba. Anyway, there were over 2,200 Indigenous leaders that gathered in Niagara in 1764. And they had a week of meetings and discussing the proclamation and discussing the relationship that would be new between the Indigenous nations of Canada and the Crown of Britain. From that came the Silver Covenant Chain Wampum. And again, that covenant chain wampum comes directly from the two row wampum. And on it, they have this chain. The metaphors of the chain was 3 silver links that connected our peoples together. And when the links got tarnished, we would sit together and polish it together. And as you know, in any relationship, when things go south, when we have disagreements, we hurt each other's feelings, we forget about each other in relationship with each other, we have to sit down and polish that chain to make it shine again. So it's a form of reconciliation. So already then they were talking about that's how we can reconcile our relationship. And reconciliation simply means to return to harmony. So that Silver Covenant chain existed long before we started talking about reconciliation in the last 20 years. But that covenant chain becomes very symbolic about it. But what the Royal Proclamation acknowledges is that Indigenous nations are founders of Canada, and as nations in nation to relationship. So the Indigenous nations are recognized as full-fledged nations, and only the Crown can make a treaty with nations. So it recognizes that, and it establishes the unique relationship of Indigenous nations with the government of Canada. And in 1982, the Canadian Constitution created Section 35 when we repatriated the Constitution from Great Britain and returned it home. The Constitution of Canada, Section 35, reads this way, and there's 4 points. Number 1, the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed. Number 2, in this act, Aboriginal peoples of Canada includes Indian, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada. And number 3, for greater certainty in subsection 1, treaty rights includes rights that now exist by way of land claims, agreements, or maybe so acquired. That's referencing to new treaties. And number 4 is notwithstanding any other provisions of this act, the Aboriginal and treaty rights referred to in subsection 1 are guaranteed equally to male and female persons. So that is the importance of the Royal Proclamation. And in many Supreme Court decisions, they've always upheld the Royal Proclamation as being current and legally standing in our contemporary times. So we have to remember that treaties then become that foundation of relationship. It's a lot deeper than a business contract. It's something that we have to work on consistently with each other to ensure that we're living a life of respect and understanding. And so when we look at the principles of the two row wampum, peace, friendship, and respect, which were those 3 white lines or those 3 links in the chain, is that peace, friendship, and understanding or respect are paramount in how we're going to have relationships. So when it comes to recognizing the work that we need to do in reconciliation, we have to understand that restitution does play a big part in reconciliation. And because a lot of land and a lot of monies have gone missing. Legal agreements and arrangements that had existed, land base and other items went missing. And there was no way for Indigenous people to defend themselves in the court of law for, over 100 years. And so we couldn't defend ourselves or raise claims because it was illegal for a lawyer to defend Indigenous people in Canada up until 1951. And then once we had those barriers removed, we then started to seek that form of reconciliation. So it's important as allies to understand and honor treaty and treaty rights and Indigenous worldviews it's important to understand them because you'll understand more of why Indigenous people do what they do. For example, when we're protesting pipeline development, for example, it isn't that we want to have a piece of the action. It isn't that we want to stop because we're naturally against progress, but it is because we have an obligation as Indigenous traditionalists to speak for the land, to speak for the water, to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. That's our role, because we know that, again, human beings can take more than they need and they become destructive, and that is in our nature as human beings. So understanding the elements in treaty and treaty rights and Indigenous worldviews really helps paint that picture, fills in a lot of gaps, and creates a lot more understanding. But also, a way that we can be a good ally is supporting the creation of space for Indigenous knowledge to offer solutions for community, social, and individual healing and strengthening. You know, the work that I've been doing with Kitchikau Aski is to create that space in Edmonton so that we can heal ourselves as a community. Over 70% of Indigenous people in Canada no longer live in their traditional communities. They live in the urban centers. And as you all know, we don't have a mosque, a temple, a cathedral that we can easily go to on Saturdays or Sundays. We actually have to make arrangements to leave the city, but no longer in Edmonton. But that's what we've been doing for a long time. And the elders have always expressed the concern that future generations will not have access to culture and ceremony, which is critical in identity formation. It's critical in self-healing. It's critical in the grounding of the individual into something that they have that sense of connection to. And connection is the key, because we need to connect to that in order to be the full beings that we really are. So, but also on the while we are healing ourselves and while we are reconstituting some of our traditions in terms of leadership and governance, we are also offering to Canada potential solutions for community, social, and individual issues. So we do have a lot to offer in those areas. You know, supporting the efforts of reclamation of economic self-sufficiency is important. For a very long time, we've lived in poverty because our traditional economy and or access to economic benefit has been limited. And that, of course, creates a culture of dependency. It creates poverty. It creates unhealthiness, access to resources. You know, the Indian Act, through the, I think it's called the Crown Relations, I think it is now called, yeah, Crown Relations, used to be Indian Affairs. But in order to build a house on a First Nation, for example, you have to go through 7 different approval processes. And, you know, it takes a long time to get things done, and funding and resources to build the housing we need is never enough. So we're always working from behind the 8 ball. So we also have to recognize and encourage municipal and provincial governments to see themselves as partners with Indigenous people, because Indigenous people recognize that since we are in relation with each other, that we look at each other as partners. Again, going back to that treaty concept of 2 great ships or 2 great vessels moving down the river of life. So instead of seeing each other in opposition to each other, you know, the binary opposition to each other, we have to look at each other as partners. So when it comes to our governments, for example, municipal, provincial, and federal governments have to align themselves and recognize that no, we're really partners in what is Canada, or what is Alberta, or what is Edmonton. Another point is to try to understand Indigenous political struggles and conflict, because Indigenous people do have political struggles. They have severe conflicts with each other as well. All Indigenous people or First Nations don't get along with each other. You know, there's still that sense of tribalism between the Blackfoot and the Cree, for example, and it's understandable, especially when you're struggling to try to get resources you need. Sometimes you're pitted against another Indigenous nation to get resources and that sort of thing. But, you know, I always try to encourage my friends, my allies, my family members to expect that negative discourse amongst Indigenous people, because like anyone else, we're not going to agree with each other. We won't see eye to eye on a number of things, but we do have ceremony that can bring us into understanding with each other, even if it is to disagree or to agree to disagree with each other. But once we understand a bit more the context of the political struggles and conflicts, then it'll create a better understanding of what really is happening within the Indigenous communities. But when we talk about reconciliation, as I was saying earlier, reconciliation again comes from the Latin, which means to return to harmony. And because the relationship between Indigenous people and Canadians has been really stressed, and it's been stressed because there simply was not a lot of understanding or available information even. Like my generation, when I was going to school, we never talked about treaties, we never talked about ceremonies, we never talked about anything outside of the fact that Indigenous people were dealing with a lot of disparity ratios, you know, addictions and those sort of things. But that is the kind of the paintbrush that really started to define Indigenous people for a long time. And of course, that gives the wrong idea as to who Indigenous people are and how they live and how they see the world. So we're trying to put back that relationship. And I've seen this reconciliation start. I've been involved in Indigenous politics for pretty much all of my life through my father and my grandfather and my uncle Harold Cardinal and a number of other relatives. So we've always seen this day as a time when we can really reach out to each other. And I'm seeing that more and more. So there's a real positiveness of efforts at grassroots efforts. When I was, when the Truth and Reconciliation started back in, when was it, something or other. Anyway, 2008, I should say. I was having lunch with a very dear friend of mine, Elijah Harper. And I asked him about this and what he thought about this Reconciliation and Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all that. He said, well, you know, it'll be a good attempt. I think it's a step in the right direction. He said, but to be honest, he said, the only time that we're going to really see true reconciliation is when the people sit together and talk and share and learn from each other. He said, that's when you'll start to see reconciliation happen. And that is so true, because if there's one thing I've learned in working with my Indigenous communities, particularly here in Edmonton, is that when the people lead, the leaders follow. That means you and I, we have to sit down as just grassroots people and start that conversation and start that sharing. And when we're all doing that together, the political leadership will realize they have to respond to that in the way that we want to see them respond. So we have a lot of power in our hands. So I think another important part is internalizing the concepts of treaty, particularly the rural wampum, peace, friendship, and understanding, as a personal commitment. I know I do. I always try my best to understand, you know, the issues of the day. I like to dig deeper. I like to ask more questions. But then again, I'm a nerd, so I like to learn. I'm always trying to read and everything like that. But another important part in being a good ally is learning to trust through dialogue and education. And I know I've had a chance to work with you folks from the interfaith community particularly, and how we created opportunities for dialogue and education. And I think that it's gone a long way in creating positive relationships in our community. And really because of that, it's really honored the voice of our people. And so being able to be recognized and heard, having that sense of being heard and listened to is it's a very powerful experience. Because we have to recognize that this is generational work. I remember my grandfather telling me that. He said, you know, it took 7 generations to get us into the mess that we're in. He said, and it'll take 7 generations to get us out of the mess. And he said, you, my grandson, are number 2. Because my father was the first generation, and I'm the second generation. He said, the best thing that we can do work with that goodness in our heart to create understanding and keep moving forward in a positive way and build relationships. And then he said, when you're old, your children will take over if you raise them right, and they will start to do the work that you're carrying on. So to create that positiveness for everyone that we're related to. And that's why the people need to lead the way to change. And that it's as simple as talking with each other. That's the first step, because from that talking, you start to identify things that you can do and what you can do to get this. And then we also must become vigilant. We need vigilance and unity in supporting each other, not being afraid to question our own behaviors as well. But when we're supporting each other, I always take the time to attend various rallies and protests that are not Indigenous based, because I'm internalizing that treaty responsibility on my part. Because the treaty is a sacred covenant between you and I, your family. And like family, I have to come and stand with you during times of struggle. So if you're struggling, I'll be there. If you're celebrating, I'll be there too. And so we need to stand united in that way and supporting each other. So it isn't just, learn about Indigenous stuff. It's me saying I have to learn about non-Indigenous stuff too, so that I have that better understanding to be more effective as a partner in relationship with the rest of Canada. And also, that self-reflection, understanding your own behaviors, understanding your own assumptions, because assumptions can really lead us into a different direction. But if we have communication, we can be aware that we're maybe heading off somewhere else. And so here's a list of things that we can do to be a good allies. Go beyond the reading of news articles, because oftentimes, in a lot of ways, especially now today with all the fake news, I guess they call it, reading articles is a good way to get some information, but also digging deeper, cross-referencing things, just taking the time to understand the issues a lot more. And one of my big cautionary notes here is to be aware of performative acts of reconciliation. And what that means is, it's great that, once a year you'll wear an orange shirt, but there has to be something more than that. It's great that we have a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our gathering. That's really positive. But those things cannot be the only things. There has to be action. And I think I was telling you, or some of you before, that Canada comes from the word Kanatan, which means a clean, pure, and sacred place. And when you remove the N from Kanatan, it becomes Kanata, or Canada. And Kanata then is a verb. That means it's a process, it's an action. So we have to make actions with reconciliation and not simple tasks. And don't get me wrong, wearing an orange t-shirt is a show of compassion and support. But taking it that step further is always important. And I always suggest to attend Indigenous events and actions and get to know the issues a bit more. Talk to your friends, talk to your Indigenous friends. There's all kinds of materials now that never was even 15 years ago that really articulates very well various issues and things that Indigenous people are doing. I also encourage you to show up at a rally or a protest to show your physical support of Indigenous issues. I always say speak out about inequities and issues of justice. Write a letter. That's always a practical things to do. Speak with elders, speak with knowledge keepers, invite elders and community leaders to speak at events, and support Indigenous arts. That's a very soft spot for me as well, because it's in the arts that where you really see where the people are at, where the society is at. And the more that we can support Indigenous arts, the more we get to know more about the Indigenous condition, Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous wisdoms, all locked within Indigenous arts. And of course, another big thing is to volunteer. Volunteering. We have over 60 Indigenous nonprofit organizations in the city of Edmonton that serve Indigenous people. And we always have issues of volunteers to carry out some of the programming we need to do. And volunteering is a wonderful way to plug into the community and to demonstrate that act of reconciliation. to share your time and energy, of course, which is valuable. And of course, one of my favorites is reconciliation through genealogy. I challenge Canadians whenever I can is to dig into your family tree, because we know in Quebec, for example, 40% of the Quebecois have an Indigenous person in their family tree, at least one. And so, and I think it's a bit less for the rest of Canada, but certainly a lot of people now are really uncovering Indigenous roots within their own family trees, because nobody spoke about it before. Nobody really brought it out in the open. So I say, if you do that genealogy search and you find that Indigenous person, try to understand and learn what were the conditions of that person in those times. Why did that person have to hide their identity, for example? What were the struggles? It then brings you closer to Indigenous people to recognize that Indigenous root within yourself. And I do take it personally myself, because I have Irish and Scottish and French as historical backgrounds to my family. And so I've just been having a wonderful time in doing research of what was happening at the time before they came over. It's really fascinating, but it also creates that understanding for me to understand more about that non-Indigenous part of my family tree, to understand who they were, why they came over. So it's a lot of fun. I have too much fun doing it. Anyway, so now I'm recognizing it's all running a little bit out of time here, because I want to be able to get to some questions. But as you know, we have Kitchikow Aski allyship in action, and working with the city of Edmonton. This took us 16 years to do. And there was a lot of education. There were a lot of issues and things that we had to deal with. So we really educated each other very well through this whole process. But Kitchikow Aski is an accessible place where urban Indigenous youth and families can access cultural resources and ceremonies very near to the heart of the city. I think it's about 5 kilometers as the crow flies to downtown Edmonton. So it's easy to get to if you're in the downtown core. It's on Fox Drive and White Mud Drive, which you can see on the map here. And the greened out area that you see is the land base of Kitchikow Aski, which is in the White Mud Nature Preserve. And it still is a very natural space. Still, it hasn't been overly developed or anything. And it's really wonderful, because we've been having ceremonies down there every now and again over the last 16 years. And you just feel a nice embrace, because it's just like almost pristine land. So it's really important for us to have that. But also it's a location where we can provide opportunities for land-based education and special gatherings. And what's important for the elders is supporting Indigenous youth and families to connect to ceremony and everything. And so it's a place to reconnect and reestablish relationship with the land, ceremony, culture, and those sorts of things. And also it's a place where Edmontonians can learn about the traditions and history of Indigenous people. We'll start programming where we can develop a program surrounding communities, community leads, I should say, and other organizations, so that we can provide that opportunity to learn more about Indigenous history and traditions. And so the site that we selected was a very cool place, because before it was the Fox Farm, it was used for centuries by Indigenous people. In our histories and our researches, even in our paleontological digs and things, they found and saw that area was camped at quite a bit over the years, and that there's that valley that it's in, the White Mud Creek Ravine, has a lot of traditional medicines in it for healing and that sort of thing. And directly across from the Kitchikow Aski site is an ochre deposit, a huge ochre deposit. And that is important because it's used in a lot of our ceremonies and traditions. And the spring is still running there that is still depositing ochre right into that huge mineral deposit. So it is still there. And so that's why we chose it. And the white mud itself is very important to ceremonies too. So you have the plants, you have the white mud, and you have the ochre, and then you have the water, and you have all those sorts of things. It really was an ideal site to choose. And so we all know that, you know, Indigenous people have to leave and all that sort of thing. But we want to ensure that Indigenous people connect to the cultural and spiritual tradition, because they just simply do a lot better and makes it a lot stronger. Like any tradition, if you're plugged into your faith and belief system, your community, your nation, you simply become a more contributing member of society. And here are the 8 elders that I've been working with since 2015. Howard Mustis is the chair, Fred Campion, Will Campbell, and some of these names some of you may know: Annabelle Kootenai, Beatrice Morin, Emil DeRocher, Wilson Bearhead, and Ron Arcand. So they've been guiding us through this whole process to make sure that we follow protocol. Here in Kitchiaski, we have, here's the overlay of the project. You can see at the bottom, there's 50 parking stalls there for vehicles. And then there's 2 large parking areas for buses, full-length buses. We have to rebuild the road and build that whole parking lot. We have 2 buildings there. One is the Kitchikau-Aski Pavilion, which has a gathering room. You can see about 40 people. We have change rooms, washrooms. To the north of that structure is the storage building, where we're going to keep all of our stuff nice and dry and safe. And then we have an amphitheater. We have walkways. We have 2 areas. One area is a teepee area ring, and you can fit in about 16 teepees in that area. And also then we have our sweat lodge area. And so that, that's where we'll do our sweat lodge ceremony. So that's phase 1, which we just finished. We're now talking about phase 2 and 3. And so we're working on that now. So the project status is that we signed our license agreement on January 16th. Yahoo! Finally, after all this time, all the construction is done. We're just going through some technical difficulties with our monitoring systems. We're having electrical issues, but it's all done for intents and purposes. Here's the hallway, where to the left, you have the changing rooms and locker rooms. To the right, you have 3 unbarriered washrooms. And they're all self-locking and everything like that. If you look at this button here, every single door in the building can be accessible through just punching that bar, and you open it automatically. So the whole site is easily accessible by people in wheelchairs or people with difficulties with movement. Here's a look at the washrooms and the change rooms and the locker rooms. Here's the Kitchiaski gathering room. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like. That's the storage space. It's quite large, actually. I was really surprised how much stuff we can actually fit in there. So, and so at the bottom left, you're looking at the teepee area. It's all done now. In the center of there is a police and fire pit, so you can use that for a lot of things. And then to the top, you can take a better picture, and this is the sweat lodge area. So we'll be building sweat lodges around this interesting design there, which is a fire enclosure. So we don't set the whole place on fire. We have to work with the Edmonton Fire Department to design a unique fire enclosure, so it met the standards and requirements of fire protection. And then in the very far end, you can see the amphitheater. It's all been sodded now, or just before it snowed. So, and everything else has been seeded. And so here's some more pictures of the sweat lodge area. And here's the sodding of the amphitheater. We said about 150 people in there. And just to give you a sense of scale, you see that person standing there, just kind of let you know what that looks like. We also have planted in traditional or indigenous plants, berries and plants and things all around the area. And what was cool is that as we were excavating and digging for pipes and all kinds of different things, we came across a lot of buffalo bones. And right there, you're looking at the buffalo horns that have been estimated to be 3,000 years old, at least. And of course, we have teeth and femur bones and all that sort of stuff. You found an old shoe, horseshoe. But those are being dated just to give an official date. And then we'll put them together into a display case that we'll have inside of the pavilion. And so what was really cool about this whole project and working in relationship with the city of Edmonton, because the city of Edmonton paid for it all. And we worked, we at the end of construction, we brought together all of our contractors and we did an honoring ceremony for each of them because they all, regardless of how long the contracts were and what they were doing, we wanted to recognize that they had input into creating something unique. And it's so unique that other cities now are calling, like Toronto, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, for example, and even Melbourne, Australia, believe it or not, are interested in following our lead in creating Indigenous ceremonial space in each of their cities. So we've done this as the principles, we've done it in the spirit of peace, friendship, and understanding. So thank you, everyone. I hope we have enough time to field some questions.
Louis, thank you so very, very much for that. I feel like I learned more in the last hour than several years of grade school and high school education about what a treaty means. And what you said is it's all about relationship, and that meant a lot. I also know how to say Kitchkowaski, so I'm excited to next time a story comes up in the news to be able to say it right. So thank you so much for that. If anyone has a question, can you use the hand signal on your okay, starting with the whites up in the, sorry, it's the M mark. I just happen to know who that is. So
hello, I have a question. You referred to as part of allyship, getting involved in different activities with the Indigenous people, including protests and rallies and things. Is there a website that we can follow that lets us know when and where these activities are?
Yes, and there's not one place that has everything, but there's a good source with the city of Edmonton that has an email kind of like newsletter that they let out every Friday. And that has an extensive list of activities and events that are taking place that are Indigenous specific. And that's with the City of Edmonton Relations Office. And if you go to Indigenous Relations Office or IRO with the City of Edmonton, you will find a link where you can sign up to get on their mailing list. That's the best one across the city. So. And then each of the organizations, of course, have their own email lists. But for me, the best one that we have so far is the Indigenous Relations Office in the City of Edmonton.
Thank you very much.
thanks for the question, McKay. Guy, you had your hand up next.
Yes, I'd like to ask if the sweat lodges will be permanent or semi-permanent structures.
Well, they're semi-permanent structures because they're made out of willows. Specifically red willows, and we haven't built them yet, but we'll build them upon need. So what happens with those sweat lodges, we build them and then we'll use them for an extended period of the time, and then just like anything else, they start to deteriorate, and then we rebuild them again. So we're not worried about people sneaking into the site and desecrating our sweat lodge structures, because we can easily replace them. So we're not worried about that. You know, I don't really expect that we're going to have that kind of issue, but you know, it's come up as a concern by other folks. But the elders say, you know, it's only willows, so we can take care of it. Yeah.
Ellen, you have a question? Can you unmute? I'm sorry, Helen, we can't hear you.
I don't know, the mute button is gone from her screen there. I don't know.
Maybe she can type it in to the chat, and then we
Oh,
can
yeah.
read the question.
Yeah, good idea.
Eileen,
Helen, can you type it?
Eileen, you're muted now.
Well, I was hoping that my voice wasn't going to overpower Helen's, but if Helen can type it in, then we'll go to the question that way. Meantime, are there any other questions? I love I guess it's not an analogy, it's actually a it started as a physical thing, but the concept of polishing the chain
Mhm.
to clean up, and and recognizing that relationships can be strained, but that's normal human behavior.
Yes.
Anyway, all right, so Helen, let's see. No, I don't see a question from you yet in chat. Are you still typing? Louis, there have been things suggested, the university has free courses to help people learn
Yes.
more about Indigenous peoples, and there are classes on how to learn Cree. I'm just curious, is that, are those ways to be allies as well, or
Well, yeah,
would
absolutely.
you rather people didn't know what you were talking about?
You know, you know, getting, what's the old adage? An ounce of knowledge is worth, you know, a pound of, you know, grief or whatever. But those are wonderful programs, because they just give you a really foundational, lots of dates and information about Indigenous history and issues. It really helps to frame it out, so you get a really great, and the MOOC course through the U of A is free. So all you have to do is sign up for that. And then there's a number of different programs and programming that's taking place through different organizations about Indigenous awareness. And, you know, Indigenous awareness, I think is a terrible title, but it's the best thing that we have right now. You know, it'll then maybe take you deeper into some of the philosophical and politically dynamic issues and that sort of thing. But to start out with, getting something basic like MOOC at the U of A is a good step to take.
Helen, thanks for putting your question in chat. Helen writes, I wonder if Métis, Indigenous people, and Inuit are all separate nations. Is that correct? Métis are not Indigenous, they are Métis. Is that correct?
No, they're all Indigenous when you take the basic definition of, you know, they're the first peoples here. The Métis are unique in the sense that they were born from Scott, Irish, and French mixture with Indigenous people. Like the Acadians were Métis people. They recognize themselves as Métis people as well. Métis coming from the French word just simply meaning mixed, but mixed with Indigenous people. So yeah, they have, and really they have their own unique language and customs and traditions. So they are by all means and all definition Indigenous, and the Inuit are also Indigenous people as well.
So would the Cajun people down in Louisiana also be Indigenous, since they're a
Well, yeah,
break off of Acadian? Yeah.
Yeah, because they have like a mixture in language, like a lot of like a Creole language as well. But they're carrying Indigenous roots from the Mi'kmaq people and the various Indigenous nations in the upper part of the United States, and also in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and Quebec. So they do have that, yeah.
Guy, is your hand still up, or is it up again?
It's up again.
Okay, please go ahead.
I have another question. I'm wondering, Louis, how soon could we organize a reconciliation event on Kitchikowski land where the people could come together and talk and learn to understand one another better?
Absolutely. Anytime after March 7th. Because I'll be back from New Zealand and Australia on the 5th. So
we should start start thinking about how we might organize that. Thank you.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a number of things that we can do, and it'll be great to have everyone down there. You know, we can do something for sure.
Great, thanks.
There'd be no tension about, how do I put this? This is finally dedicated land for you
Yeah.
to have other folks who are not Indigenous suddenly feel comfortable arriving there? Like, would it just?
Yeah, well, there's three things that the elders said that was important for this. One is that it's a place where Indigenous people can reconnect with ceremony and healing and that sort of thing. Two, that it's focused on Indigenous youth and families, because that's really critical. And three, is that we have an obligation to reconciliation, to reach out to the non-Indigenous community and create opportunities to share, introduce you to some of our ceremonies, introduce you to some of our history, our language. So we can do a number of different things down there that can focus on one or all of those things so that we can share what we have. And I think that then creates more of an understanding amongst Joe Canadian, to understand Indigenous people a little bit more and in a deeper way. So yeah, no, it's not just for Indigenous people. It's for Edmontonians who want to learn about Indigenous people as well.
Wonderful. Are there any other questions before we call it? Oh, Karen?
Yeah. Hi, Louis. You mentioned something about the land acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And how we shouldn't just be paying lip service. I don't know if that's exactly how you put it, but
I say performative.
performative. Right. The positive thing that I see is that it has brought an awareness of Indigenous First Nationhood and historic land usage. I mean, this is something that's a positive thing that we are reminded of over and over again when we hear it. What is appropriate in your opinion, appropriate or not appropriate to be included in a land acknowledgement if we're not just trying to be performative, if we really want to be an ally?
Yes, I think, and I thank you for this question because it's an important question. When we started this acknowledgement statements, I wrote the first one for Mayor Mendel. And then the new mayor, Don Iveson, asked me to write the Indigenous portion to his inaugural speech at City Hall.
And you wrote one for me that was used by Mayor Krause in St. Albert when he asked me if to write one, and because he had come to our Harmony brunch and had heard. Anyways, it was very interesting and very appreciative.
Well, in my opinion is that when we do the land acknowledgement, all we're doing is acknowledging that Indigenous people were here before. That doesn't really speak to the relationship aspect of what Canada is about. That's why when I wrote those first acknowledgements, the second half of it was recognizing the treaties for what they were, that we are all treaty people and that we all have obligations to each other. We are in relationship. And really, if we do it right, in my opinion, is that this should be an invocation, like saying grace before dinner. It reminds us to be solemn and respectful of the relationship we have with each other, based on the concepts and principles that we find in treaties and in the process of treaty. That then becomes a lot more meaningful, rather than just listing off names of people who were here before. But when we start to talk about treaty and relationship, we are now invoking something sacred. So it becomes a form of prayer. And that's what's missing from land acknowledgement statements, is that aspect of relationship, the spirit and the intent of treaties. That to me is really a Canadian prayer, acknowledging each other for who we are.
Thank you.
Family. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful because I find it awkward and difficult to listen to land acknowledgements, listen to me tripping over my tongue. And that's my point here, is when people have a land acknowledgement to read and they have trouble pronouncing the names of the different nations.
Yeah.
And it kind of takes away, in my opinion, the heart of the matter, which is okay, we're making an effort to say them, but it sort of sounds really perfunctory. I've just got to get
Yeah.
through these bills
Yeah.
that, yeah, anyways,
Well, that's true. That's exactly it. And you know what's funny or sad, depending how you look at it, is that even my own people are getting tired of it as well. They also will roll their eyes, and here we go again, because we're losing that meaning and that essential, the essence of what that was meant to do. You know, I wouldn't say let's do a land acknowledgement. I say let's do a treaty relationship acknowledgement. That way it's a lot more meaningful, and it places all of us into that sphere. And that's why it's important to recognize that, because it's all about relationships, right? And the treaties have created that space where we can have what is Canada now, but also to recognize that we really are connected to each other in a very deep way, and that we have obligations to each other. It isn't a one-way street. Right now, I think some of the land acknowledgements can be seen as one-way streets where you're always paying homage to the Indigenous folk. But you also need to recognize that we have an obligation as well to the settlers.
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Over to the Wright family who have a question or their hand up.
More of a comment, really. Just that struggling with the names during treaty acknowledgement things is, it's like, come on, it's been over 100 years. We should have learned how to pronounce your names by now. Yeah.
That too, like that's another issue, right? Thanks, yeah.
I hate to refer back to my job again, but handling election night and all the new ward names in the city of Edmonton took weeks of practice.
Yeah.
And I talked about Ward Dene as much as I could, and because I knew I was saying that one right, but it took us a little while to learn Papasteo when it looked different, but it's something we adjusted to and we use now, and it's not the challenge we thought it would be. And I guess as we make changes and try to be allies, that we'll find that.
Yes.
Anyway, I want to thank you all for being here for this this final event in World Interfaith Harmony Week. This was the event, I got to be honest, I was looking forward to the most, and it certainly was the most eye-opening for me and the most wonderful event. When you look in the comments, I hope, Louis, you'll see everyone thanking you very much for the time you put into this and for the presentation. And I'm so thankful you were willing to do this for us. And I'm sure that the Interfaith Center will be able to help in a lot of ways to try to facilitate more knowledge to help people become true allies. The Edmonton Interfaith Center for Education and Action has that name specifically for education and action, to try to help people learn learn more about each other in every ways, whether it's different faiths, whether it's different cultures. And if you want to know more about the Edmonton Interfaith Center, if you are joining us because you're a pal of Lewis's and wanted to come tonight, please go to our interfaith website at Edmonton or edminterfaithcenter.ca. You can find out more about us, and there is a PayPal option there to be able to become a member if you would like to. The fee is only $25 a year, and we hope to have, with the pandemic, hopefully going to be declared over someday soon, many more events that will give you the opportunity to get together to know each other. We had our first back in-person event on Sunday for a concert, and it was very well attended. We're so thankful for all of you who were at that. And I'll leave you this evening again with great thanks for coming out tonight. And again, a huge thanks to Louis. So good night, everyone. And thank you so much for being here. Appreciate
Thank you,
you all.
everyone.
All right.
Blessings to you all.
Merci
Blessings to you
beaucoup.
all.